interesting things about Stoke-on-Trent that people may not know. Most people know that we're made of 6 towns. From the north, Tunstall, Burslem, which is called the mother town, Hanley, Stoke-upon-Trent, Fenton and Longton. Now Stoke-upon-Trent, which everybody calls Stoke, it's the only town with the river Trent running through it. And Stoke means place, upon means next to or by the side of, ancient words obviously, and the Trent is the river, so place next to the Trent. Now it's on a floodplain. Where we are now, the Spoe factory, this is actually a floodplain here. And over the years, obviously, different things have been put into it to make it up. Now, the Minster, St. Peter ad Vincula, which means St. Peter in chains, there are only 6 ad Vincula churches in the country. And one of those is the church, the chapel in the Tower of London. But St. Peter ad Vincula, the Minster church there's been a church, or a place of worship, I wouldn't necessarily call it church, a place of worship on that site since at least 702 AD. We know that because the records go back that far, which means that before records were written down, something was established, so it's probably 50 years older. So there's been a place of worship there since probably 650 AD. And at one time, Penkle, the village at the top of the hill there, between Stoke-on-Trent and Newcastle, Penkle was the main parish, and Stoke-on-Trent, so Stoke-upon-Trent, and Newcastle belonged to Penkle. And that's why it's the ancient borough, the ancient royal borough of Newcastle under Lyme, and the city of Stoke-on-Trent. Now the city is less than 100 years old. It was the federation of the 6 towns in 1910, and it became the city in 1925. So in a few years' time, we'll be celebrating 100 years of the city. But the town of Stoke-upon-Trent is over 1,400 years old. Burslem's probably the oldest town. That's why it's called the mother town. And it's got some of the most magnificent buildings in it. It really has. The Wedgwood Institute and the what's called the Big House, which was the Wedgwood's house. It had Royal Dalton factory there. Wonderful, wonderful. Royal Dalton, Henry Dalton, very clever man, very astute. What he did, he sent things to the Royal House, Victoria, and they kept sending them, and eventually he got a Royal Merit. So that's why he was able to call. He sent it for free, you know. Things you don't know about Spode. Spode introduced the first real whiteware. Everything was also slightly cream. Wedgwood was, yes, he was a great potter, but Josiah Wedgwood had, I think it was smallpox. It might have been polio, but I think it was smallpox as a child. So he wasn't particularly strong. And of course, those days, you had a treadle. You didn't have electric. It was you used your leg to pump the wheel around. But he was a brilliant advocate of science, and he experimented with lots of different glazes and lots of different firings, and this is how it came about. Such beautiful stuff. But he was a great believer in looking at history for inspiration, and that's why we have the Etruscans and the Wedgwood vases and stuff like that. We've got a place in Stoke-on-Trent called Etruria, which is named after the Etruscans. All sorts of things like that. I love all this kind of stuff. Let's bring it up to the modern age. Let's bring it up to the modern age where you've got a vehicle, and to start your vehicle, you turn the key and the spark plugs click in. Did you know that the spark plugs were invented by a man from Stoke-on-Trent? A man called Oliver Lodge. And just across the road from the Spoe factory, there is Oliver Lodge House. Just up the road where St. Peter's School used to be is Oliver Road and Lodge Road, and they're named after Oliver Lodge. And he invented the spark plug. He also discovered radio waves, but he couldn't see a commercial use for them, so he sold the patent to a man called Marconi. And everybody knows the history of that is Marconi's credited with discovering radio waves, but he didn't. It was Oliver Lodge. Reginald Mitchell. I went to Hanley High Grammar School for young gentlemen. Hard to believe, I know, but I did. And one of our houses was Mitchell, and we had a propeller off a Spitfire in the main foyer. Reginald Mitchell was a great designer of aeroplanes, and he designed and invented the Spitfire. A man from Butt Lane, strange name, but Butt Lane, just up the road between, at the time it was part of Stoke-on-Trent, now it's part of Newcastle. In Longton, in the Queen's Park in Longton, it is a beautiful park. If you get a chance to go, it's a wonderful, wonderful park. But the Queen's Park was a gift and named after Queen Victoria. A lot of the places around, the Victoria Ground, Stoke City old ground was the Victoria Ground, the Victoria pub. There's lots of pubs around here called the Victoria or the Albert. But it was a gift, the land was a gift. It was wonderful. All sorts of things that people don't realise about the city that are thrilling. The River Trent runs through the city. It's not very big here because it begins just outside the city limits in Biddulph, and it comes down through Knipersley and that way. And I believe there's underground streams in Biddulph Moor. I could be mistaken about that, but that's what I understand. But they come in and they form the Trent, and it comes through Stoke and it goes out through Trentham and it goes out towards Burton on Trent, and it goes out to, and goes even further east, and then it turns north. It turns north and it comes out eventually, runs on the eastern side of the Pennines, and it comes out eventually at the beginning of the Humber estuary. There's a man called James Brindley, and James Brindley he's an engineer, he was a civil engineer, and he believed firmly in the power of water as a transport method. And so we got great people like Isambard Kingdom Brunel and Thomas Telford and other great people to back him. And he put together the 4 great rivers of the country, the Thames, the Severn, the Mersey and the Trent, and joined them up with the canals. Now he's a local man, James Brindley. Unfortunately, he died before that actually finished, but we have the canal system in this country, thanks to James Brindley. Wonderful, wonderful inventions that people forget. And that was something that was called puddling. Now, I didn't understand this until it was explained to me. Basically, you've got a load of blokes and you stamp and you walk up and down on the bed of the canal, and it drives all the air out. And if it drives all the air out, the water can't sink. So that clay at the bottom is like concrete because it's got no air in it. It's called puddling. It makes a puddle. Well, of course, a big puddle in the canal's case. Tunstall. Tunstall is the northernmost of the towns, and I made a story up called the Tunstall Pirate. One of very, very famous person comes from Tunstall. Everybody knows it's Robbie Williams. Okay, and I like Robbie Williams. I know he supports the Vale and all like that, but I'm a Stoke City fan. But I like his stuff. I like his music. I like his writing. I like his singing. And he's not the only one. Some of the great designers, 2 of the great designers. Ladies who don't get enough credit, I don't think. Clarice Cliff from Tunstall, and Susie Cooper, also from Tunstall. Another great woman who's more famous for being in Hanley, but because that's where the music hall was, but a lady called Gertie Gitana, who was a music hall singer. She was born in Tunstall, and there's a Gitana Street in Hanley named after her behind the what used to be the Theatre Royal. And I've performed at the Theatre Royal, darling, you know. I acted, you know. Yes. And but all those things. Then you come a little bit further south. You come to Burslem. We've talked about Royal Dalton. We've talked about the Wedgwood Institute and stuff like that. But Burslem Park, Tunstall Park. Tunstall's got a wonderful park there too. But Burslem Park is a beautiful park, and it's like many Victorian parks because we're basically a big valley here. It's built on the hill. I actually proposed in Burslem Park. Maybe I shouldn't say that, but I did. My wife was a Smallthorne. But the Victorians are very clever, and they made a small space look very much bigger. Josiah Wedgwood built his factory down at Barlaston, and he was a contemporary of the Cadbury family, who were based in Birmingham, and they were all Quakers. You have to look that up, Quakers. And it was a religious group. And the Cadbury factory is built in the middle of a really heavily industrialised area in Birmingham called Bourneville. That's where you get Bourneville chocolate from. But he made sure his workers could walk through green, trees, grass, little avenues, so they'd have fresh air to breathe. Wedgwood thought it was a brilliant idea, so he built his factory out at Barlaston. There's a railway station there called Wedgwood, and his workers were able to walk. Yes, it was a dirty building. It's a dirty industry, the pottery industry, lots of smoke and all like that, but they could breathe fresh air going in and they could breathe fresh air coming out. That's the way you treat your workers, you know. Well, Dalton Henry Dalton was partly responsible for helping to fund Burslem Park. He wasn't alone by any stretch of the imagination, but that's what they did. The altruistic nature of the Victorians was really, really important. Pardon me, we come down into Hanley now. We've got Hanley. There's a great pit in Hanley called Hanley Deep. Wow, deep. I mean, seriously deep. I've never went down it myself. I've only been to Chatley Whitfield as a tourist thing, but it was really, really deep, and they're really clever about the way Hanley is. It means the high lea, or high meadow, and if you look at it geographically, it's on a hill. But it's become the main shopping centre, and lots and lots of famous people have had factories there. We've still got Dudson's. Now the Dudson building, sadly not a factory anymore, manufacturing anymore, but now it's host to VAST, which is the volunteer organisation, and one or two other. You've still got the Dudson Museum. People forget about the Dudson Museum. We've got some incredible museums here. The Potteries Museum and Art Gallery. We've got the Gladstone. We've got Ford Green Hall. But people forget about the Dudson. It's not a huge museum. It's actually one bottle kiln. One big bottle kiln with a spiral staircase in it. It looks fabulous. And you should go and pay it a visit, as well as the other ones, including the Gladstone up in Longton. Coming down into Stoke upon Trent, we have the Spoke factory, we've got the Port Merion factory, we used to have Bilton's and several other factories. Now we've got shops, and we've got, yes, the Spoke factory doesn't exist anymore, but we've got now artists coming here. Great use of an old industrial space. Stoke upon Trent, if you look to the library, the old library, it's got porthole windows, incredible porthole windows. On the top there is a mosaic with Shakespeare's head on it and a quote from one of his plays, and I've forgotten the quote now, sadly. But all this is wonderful. London Road, Stoke here, used to be much straighter than it is. It's still pretty straight now. And it was a racetrack. It really was a racetrack. And outside what used to be Bilton's, that is now called the West End Village, there is, made by a local blacksmith, a lady called Caris Jones. Caris is incredibly gifted. She's got these wonderful horses on the fencing, and they're part and parcel of it, and that's the history. Also, on the main gates to the storage area at the back of the building, which is on London Road, really, is an elephant. She's made that. It's a huge life-size elephant being tugged by men like this, because Barnum and Bailey's came here in the early 1900s, late 1800s maybe, and an elephant escaped. Unfortunately, it had to be put down. It had a big panic. But these men tried to catch it, and there's the story of the elephant right there, all around Stoke. It's fantastic. The canal ran through there. The canal ran through what's now Yeaman Street Park, through the centre of the town, Stoke, and went out towards Oak Hill. And there's a monument there to a man called Timothy Trow. You'll have never heard of Timothy Trow. Why should you? But Timothy Trow is a bona fide hero. People get called heroes all the time here. He was a tram driver, and the tram ran alongside the canal. Now, at that particular point, there was a wheel, the water wheel, in the canal, and a little girl fell in, and she was drowning. He stopped the tram, jumped in, saved the girl, but unfortunately, for how I'm not quite sure, but he got hit by the wheel and he drowned. But that monument's there to him. It's along the boulevard. It's called the boulevard now. Well, the boulevard used to be the canal. So we're going to go up slightly dogleg, slightly south now into Fenton. Fenton's the largest of all the towns. People don't realise this, but it is. It's the largest in area. It's the largest in population. Obviously, the Fen town, the town of the Fens, you know. But if you go to up the hill to Fenton, what a magnificent view of the whole city you can see, because it's one of the highest points. Beautiful place. And there's a park there and everything. And it's called Fen Park. But Fenton's made up of several different little places like Heron Cross and places like that. We missed Heron Cross off. Missed Heron Cross. And now, unfortunately, with the A50, whilst the A50's made transport through the city very much quicker, it's cut Fenton in half and separated a little bit. But, you know, the Magistrates' Court was there. Oh, the Magistrates' Court. It was also a dance hall. It's been many, many things. And it was built, again, altruistically by a man called Henry Meath Baker, and Baker Street's there named after him. His grandson, who I know personally, bought it back from the council for the Ministry of Justice, I think, because it was, like I say, it was the court. So it's being used again for other artistic things now. In there you've got Albert Square, not Albert Square Watford, no, not like that at all, no. It's the genuine Albert Square. They've got the most beautiful war memorial there. It's really, really gorgeous. Quite moving ceremonies get held there every Remembrance Day. The southernmost of the cities, of the towns in the city, is Longton. I've already mentioned Queen's Park, which is fantastic, but there was probably more bottle kilns in Longton than anywhere else in any other town in the city. Weirdly, the canals didn't go there. I don't know why, but the Gladstone Potteries Museum's there, and the core building, and you've got these wonderful, wonderful vestiges of history that you can go and look at. And you can go and find out what a Saga Maker's bottom knocker was. And one of my characters is called Toby Jug, and Toby's been brought forward 150 years by Doctor Who to tell you what life was like when the bottle kilns were running. And all around there, you could go to a place called Normacott, and you could go all the way along Normacott, and there was a factory right the other side, both sides of St James's Church there. There was factories all over the place, little corner factories, people who only made cup handles, people who only did lithographing, people who only made saucers, people who only made teapot lids, little cottage industries. Wonderful, all the way down, lined all the way going to Mere. And then you've got your districts, you've got your Bentley's and your Burials and your Abbeyaltons. And the city's more than just the 6 towns, but we should celebrate the 6 towns' uniqueness. Burslem, Molly Lee. Now Molly Lee was called a witch. Now she wasn't. She lived 1643 to early 1700s. She died at age 61. They kept trying to catch her out. And she wasn't a witch. She was a person who knew about things that would make you better. You know, the roots, the spices, the herbs and things like that. Unfortunately, from what I can gather, she wasn't a very good looking lady. And at a time when ugliness was conflated with sinfulness and beauty with holiness, she was scary looking probably, and she chose to live on her own. So people, whilst it's a terrible thing really, it's hypocritical, because whilst people called her names and, you know, mocked her and all like that, they probably went to her if they had boils to get rid of, or, you know, they wanted something for their dog because the dog was ill. They probably went to Molly quietly, and that's how she probably made a living. She was eventually arrested for witchcraft. No proof whatsoever, and unfortunately she died before, well, I say unfortunately, fortunately she died before she could be tried and before she could be burnt, because that's what would have happened. Her grave is in St John's in Burslem, and it's buried the wrong way round, so that her evil soul can't escape, which is unfair on a poor woman who just did her best for the community, in my honest opinion. Just my opinion, you can draw your own conclusions to that. Yeah, so much more. There's so much more to our city than just we are the potteries. Yes, we're very proud of what we've done, and quite rightly, and there's nothing wrong with shouting out our heritage, because I'm a great believer in keeping the heritage. And we should say, you know, we've still got Wedgwood, and we've had Spode, and we've still got Pump Merrion. Pump Merrion gets overlooked. We've still got Moorcroft. We've got all the new people. There's nothing wrong with saying those things, but we also had the pits here. That's why Stoke-on-Trent became the potteries. We're surrounded underneath us by very cheap fuel at the time, was coal. And that's why it was built here. Not because we got great soil, because we haven't. We've given a word to the English language. We have. It's not a great word, but it's a word all the same. In fact, it's a word that's despised across the world, I think. It's called pothole. You see, the likes of me, working class lad, I'd have been given what's called a mow, which is a big square hammer like that, with the handle coming up through the middle, not like this, but so you hammer it like this. And that would flatten all the land that the rich toffees there, they would, so they wouldn't damage their little bottoms while they're riding in their carriages. Well, while we're having their gin and their soirees, we go along, because the soil now has been pugged and it's got all the air's taken out of it. So we dig it up, make pots with it. It's a pot hole. And that's where the word comes from. Which I love. I love that. The fact, it's not a very nice word, but we've given something to the world, to the English lexicon. The soil, the clay here that is used is very good for things like stoneware and ovenware, but it's not really good for the china stuff. That comes from Devon and Cornwall. And that's why James Brindley did the canals, you see, because he used to sail it up from there, get it to places like Manchester and Liverpool, the ports, and then it would be fetched down. Well, of course, then it's fetched down, the roads weren't like we got today, tarmac and everything. It was horse and cart, So it's heavy, it's cumbersome, it takes a long time to get here. So on the canals, they could just load it on and they would sail it through. And the canals, you would bring other ware from different places, probably from Manchester, probably wool. So the canal wasn't empty coming down. And then they would go down probably to Birmingham or somewhere like that. And they'd take pots there and come back with steel and, engineering pieces. And they could go out to other places and get different types of food. And that, so it wasn't, I wouldn't fancy putting coal and then following it with wheat, but you have to have a good clean out, I suppose. But everybody had their own uses. Everybody probably had their own specialities. I don't know the full stories of the canals. I'm going to do some research about that. But that's how it all worked. And that was Brindley's idea, and it did work. And once again, a man from Stoke-on-Trent. We move on to the modern age. Stoke City and Port Vale have not achieved the successes of other clubs. But we have had the world's first ever footballing night with Sir Stanley Matthews, who, when he had his testimonial in 1967, I think it was, I was at the match. People from footballers from all around the world, names maybe you haven't heard of, names maybe you have, I don't know, but they begged to come to people like Pele, Lev Yashin. This is when Russia was the USSR, and to get out of Russia, you had to escape, basically. And the USSR government gave Lev Yashin, the greatest goalkeeper of the time, permission to come and play in his testimonial. Unheard of. That's the esteem that Sir Stanley Matthews was held in. And he played till he was knocking on 50. Gordon Banks, World Cup winner, goalkeeper again, played for Stoke City. Jeff Hurst, scorer of the only person who scored 3 goals in a World Cup final, played for West Ham at the time, came along and played for Stoke City. So many others. I'm just trying to think now. Robbie Earle. Robbie who? Robbie Earle, local lad, born here in Stoke-on-Trent, of Jamaican parents. And he played in the World Cup for Jamaica, the first time that Jamaica ever played in it. Wonderful. And I've seen him as a pundit on the television, and I've heard other people who know him better than I do. I've only met him once, very, very briefly, shook his hand, that was it. Apparently he's a really thoroughly pleasant bloke. So, we're known for our friendliness here, and Robbie's part and parcel of that. All the things that we've got in this city are people-based. All the things that we're shouting about. Yes, we've got great buildings on it, but they're all we're shouting about are people-based. And everything I've said, I'm hoping that I've made that emphasis that it's people. Yes, we've got the lovely parks and we've got the canal, but they're all of it, the centre of it is people. You've heard of Charles Darwin and the origin of the species, and the ascent of man, is it called? I think. He went on a 3-year journey around the world, and he found out the Galapagos Islands, and he worked out that evolution must have been a reality. He was the grandson-in-law of Josiah Wedgwood, who helped to fund his journey. Josiah Wedgwood, the great Christian, funding the journey of a man who came up with the theory of evolution. I'm not sure what Darwin was, whether he was Christian or not, but I know that he waited a year to publish his findings because he didn't want to upset anybody. Whatever your beliefs are, the belief in altruistic and beneficial donations to society. Josiah Wedgwood wasn't the only one, but we do that a lot here. We do that a lot in the city where people are given something to help them to progress. Other things that the city can be proud of. Most of you will not have heard of a small town in the Czech Republic, which was then Czechoslovakia, called Lidice. During the war, Adolf Hitler's right-hand man, a man called Heinrich Reinhardt, was assassinated by the Czech resistance. And it was assumed that they'd hidden in the village of Lidice. It was a mining village, and Hitler declared, "Lidice must die!" And a man called Barrett Strauss, who? Barrett Strauss, declared, no, Hitler is wrong. Lidice shall live. And what he did, he was the local doctor. He specialised in diseases of the respiratory system, things like emphysema, miners' diseases and things like that. And that's why he was very popular. He was in Harold Wilson's government, in his cabinet in 1964. But he declared in 1942, because he was only a doctor then, he was a local council, I think, and he said, we're all going to meet in the Victoria Hall in Hanley. All the miners got together, and he said, we've got to rebuild this place. We can't let it die. We can't let Hitler win. Strauss was a Jew, and he'd escaped, and he was educated in Huddersfield University, and he came to work here when he was a doctor, when he was qualified. He knew what being under Hitler's thumb meant. So the miners of this city got together and put a day's pay in, which is a lot of money then, during the war, and they built up a big fund. I think it's about £48,000, which doesn't seem a lot, but that was the equivalent of about £1 million today. And after the war, Lidice was rebuilt. And this started in Stoke-on-Trent, but it spread out nationally and internationally, and so that's how Lidice came to rebuild. There are up in Chell, just back of Tunstall Park there, by St Margaret Ward School, there is Barnet Way and Strauss Avenue, and they're named after Barrett Strauss. He became Sir Barrett Strauss in 1966, and sadly he passed away shortly afterwards. But his memory lives on, and we're going to have a Lidice Lives Memorial Garden up in Hanley. I'm not quite sure when it's going to take place, but hopefully in the next 2 years, and you will see it there, and the story of that wonderful achievement by the people of this city. You'll see it there. It'll be a monument to the goodness of people, to the belief that things can be better. Lidice was rebuilt. The old village was left. There's a huge rose garden, a magnificent rose garden between that and the new village called Bustrat. And the kids there support Stoke City, and they wear red and white stripes. And they've been over here, which is a few years ago now, maybe 7 years ago, and hopefully we're going to go across for the 80th anniversary in a couple of years' time and take some children with us there. We'll have to see. So I've been doing some volunteer driving for Meals on Wheels. And guess where that started? Right here in Stoke-on-Trent. You see, we service the world with our crockery, with our plates, cups, saucers, whatever. But we've got a lot more to offer than just that. Thanks for listening.